Hi, Kate. Thanks so much for joining us today.
So great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So excited to dive in and talk a little bit today about the role of technology and kind of climate action. And I'd like to maybe start by recognizing the fact that technology companies are really starting to step up to the climate challenge. We see companies committing to net zero targets, investing in innovation and startups, really looking to find new ways to use data to drive decarbonization. We also noticed a sizable uptick in the tech industry's presence at COP26. Just to kind of kick things off, be curious to get your views on what you think the most important actions the tech industry has taken so far around climate change, and perhaps dive in a little bit to some of the hardest areas you've need to see traction to date.
Yes, I agree with you. Having worked in the space for a long time, I am incredibly heartened by the corporate sector in general, just the raising of the bar of ambition, and especially in the tech sector. And I often refer to it as the race to the top, which is exactly what we need for the planet right now. So I'm thrilled, and we see this as critical at Google. And equally, it's truly been in our DNA since we were founded. So for more than 2 decades, we have been very focused on sustainability at Google. This goes all the way back to, in 2007, we committed to be a carbon neutral company. In 2017, we matched 100% of our electricity use with renewable energy, and we've done that for the last 4 years. And we've also really sought ways to do that work in partnership. We've joined other organizations like the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance. We've joined with 300 companies that are a part of that, working towards, many, many gigawatts of clean energy over the next several years. Same with other groups like RE100. So it's certainly not just Google, but we were very early in this space. Then we've looked at the next frontier, which is 24/7 carbon-free energy. We see this as a key area. We've committed to operate all of our data centers and offices on 24/7 carbon-free energy by the end of this decade. And again, this is a place where partnership has been critical, not only within the tech industry, but with many other partners. We've been working with cities, with other companies, the UN, on an initiative called SE for All, where we're working together to realize a 24/7 carbon-free grid. So lots of really good progress, many years of work, and obviously a lot of work left to do. But this work is really hard. And not to say everything I haven't mentioned hasn't been challenging, but the thing
What has been,
that
do you think, the hardest part today? So obviously it's great to see that there's been a lot of progress, and I think I'm excited to see that continue. But yeah, as you said, it's hard.
Yes, this is hard. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that. We are setting bold goals at Google, at other tech companies, at other corporations. This work is hard, but also that's what we're called to do right now in this critical decade of action. We need to set bold goals. And now we're really moving into this phase of implementation. How do we get there? So I think one thing that I'm really focused on that is extremely challenging is we have committed to net zero by 2030. And this is something that's challenging for any company, but especially for a really high growth company like Google. Basically, what this means is that we need to continuously work to hold our emissions flat, but also to do that as we grow. And so what we've basically said is, look, we're going to reduce the majority of our emissions from 2019 baseline, and then we will utilize carbon removal solutions for anything that's left over. And our CEO Sundar, I think, said it best last year. He said, "Hey, this stresses me out. This is a long shot, but that technology and innovation is going to get us there." And I agree with Sundar. I'm stressed. This keeps me up at night. But also, I have to say, I am optimistic because the huge potential technology has, and also collaboration, as I was mentioning. Collaboration has been the name of the game in sustainability. It is a team sport, and we're going to keep doing that. And we just made a great announcement a few weeks ago with Stripe, Shopify, Meta, McKinsey, a new initiative called Frontier, where Google, we've committed $200 million. Collectively, we've committed almost $1 billion to essentially drive over a decade's worth of innovation in carbon removals over the next 3 to 5 years. So this work is hard. It requires teamwork, it requires innovation, but I'm really energized.
I mean, building off the topic of teamwork, I mean, in addition to other companies, there's also your customers themselves, your users. Can you talk a little bit about how you view the ability to mobilize your customers and users in a way to drive impact and change?
Yes, this is a topic I am extremely passionate about. I had the honor of joining Google about 7 years ago. And prior to that, I was the federal chief sustainability officer in the Obama White House. And the federal government in the US is the single largest energy user in the world. So I was coming from this organization with a huge footprint, but what brought me to Google, what has kept me here and so excited about the work that I get to do every day is that we have this huge privilege of having products that billions of people use every day. And there is so much potential for us to make the sustainable choice the easiest choice for everyone. And so we're looking at this in the near term. We've made a commitment by the end of this year that we want to enable 1 billion new sustainable actions through our core products. And we're already making great progress. We announced several features at the end of last year that really give you a flavor for what we see as possible. I think my favorite is something that we call eco routing. For folks who use Google Maps in the US, you may have noticed that now the default option in your Google Maps, as long as it has a similar ETA, is the most fuel efficient route. And through some work that we did with the National Renewable Energy Lab in the US, we estimate that this has the potential to reduce carbon emissions to the equivalent of taking about 200,000 cars off the road. So very meaningful. And we'll be expanding eco routing to Europe later this year. And we're doing other things too. For example, folks that are in Singapore, you might be looking for bike shares. We are also thinking about how do we give people better information about how to use alternative forms of transportation. So not only great biking directions in Google Maps, which I know I use all the time, but also where are their bike share stations? And then even, is there a bike available real time in the stall? So when you get there, you're going to be able to hop on and get where you need to go. And then, of course, Nest. The Nest Learning Thermostat has been in the Google family for a long time. And Nest is enabling people to reduce their cost of heating and cooling their homes. I know in Singapore, it gets really hot. The last time I was there, it was very hot, lots of AC. This is going to be critical to reduce home energy use. And so that's what Nest has been doing. We've now reached a point where Nest has enabled nearly 100 billion kilowatt hours of energy to be reduced, which is, we did the math on this, essentially the equivalent to lighting up the entire planet for 10 days. So some really significant opportunities we have to empower everyone to take action. And really, this is just the beginning. There's a lot more to come.
That's fantastic. I mean, I couldn't live without Google Maps and my Nest, so big fan. Maybe to kind of build off of how there's connectivity to other organizations with the products and services you have, how do you think about how the things that you're building at Google could have an impact on other organizations achieving their sustainability goals?
Absolutely. So, the way that we have looked at all of this work, which we think of as our third decade of climate action, is it's about leading at Google. And I mentioned the work that we're doing on net zero. It's about enabling everyone, what we were just talking about with our billion user products. But the third leg of that stool is supporting partners. We also really want to be enabling cities, other businesses to be taking action. And we've focused on cities in particular because cities represent about 70% of carbon emissions. And so we made a commitment a couple of years ago that we want to enable 500 cities and local governments to reduce 1 gigaton of carbon emissions by 2030 and thereafter. So that is very significant, 1 gigaton of emissions. I think that's actually roughly equivalent to the carbon emissions of the nation of Japan. So this is a big, bold goal. And the way that we want to enable cities is through a tool that we've built, which is called the Environmental Insights Explorer. This tool is now available in 20,000 cities around the world, and this includes Singapore. And it has unique data from Google, things like the solar potential of rooftops, or the carbon footprint of buildings, the carbon footprint of transportation systems. And we're even bringing in data around other areas like air quality and even tree canopy. Where are the best places to be planting trees in your city to create more shade, to manage water, to reduce emissions? So this tool is meant to be helpful. It's meant to be decision useful for cities. And we developed it in partnership with the Global Covenant of Mayors, with actual cities in mind. And we're put to work. We've seen, for example, here in the US, right down the street from where I am today in San Francisco, the city of San Jose, they wanted to set a really bold solar target for their city. And they said, what do we really think we have the potential to do? They utilized this tool and they set a 1 gigawatt solar target for their rooftops. So we're really seeing this data being put into action, and that's exactly what we want to be doing. And another example that I would just share is as it relates to companies. Again, Google is not alone, happily, as I said, in this race to the top. Many companies are setting bold targets for themselves, and we want to put data in their hands. So another great way that we're doing that is through a platform called Google Earth Engine. This is a geospatial tool that we've had for many years that's been utilized by scientists, for example, for protecting tropical rainforests in the Amazon. But now we're making it available to companies through Google Cloud. And an early pioneer customer of this was Unilever, who said, look, part of achieving our sustainability goals is our palm supply chain. We really want to be reducing the footprint of our supply chain as it relates to palm. And so they've been using this tool to enable them to have more data, more insights to make progress against their responsible sourcing goals. So just a couple examples for you, both how we're looking at enabling public sector as well.
I mean, so many ways technology can play a role, whether it's within your own operations, with your users, with other partners and companies. But technology and its existence and its proliferation, can't fix everything and can't address climate change alone. What other factors do you think are required to get things to move faster?
So as I mentioned, I come from a background in the public sector, and I think in addition to corporate action, policy action is a really key piece of the puzzle, as well as individual action, which we've also been talking about. And this is another area where we've been really focused at Google, is how do we engage in public-private partnership to influence and provide feedback on what are actually useful policies that are going to enable us to take action as companies, as individuals. And a couple examples I would share, one in the APAC region is in Taiwan. A few years ago, we were able to finally sign our first long-term renewable energy agreement in Taiwan for 10 megawatts of power. And this was possible because of longstanding conversations that Google and other industry stakeholders engaged in with the Taiwanese government that contributed to there ultimately being an amendment to the country's Electricity Act. And it enabled non-utility companies to directly buy renewable energy, which is one of the factors that's really critical in driving grid decarbonization and in companies meeting net zero targets, meeting 24/7 carbon-free energy targets. So that's a great example. Another I would share is just a few weeks ago, we released a policy paper on 24/7 carbon-free energy with a really specific set of policy recommendations. And again, I think when I think back to my time, working at the White House, working at the Department of Energy, what I found really helpful was when companies would come to the table and say, hey, here's some really specific things that we think would be valuable, that we think would unlock action. So we talked about several things. One is, in the US, we need to pass a federal clean energy standard. We also said, we think that existing nuclear energy is a critical piece of the grid mix today, that we need to keep this carbon-free energy online, assuming it can be operated safely, because otherwise the carbon footprint of the grid is going to go up in the near term. We've also seen that leveraging regional and competitive wholesale electricity markets is really critical. In the US, about 80% of the corporate renewable energy deals have been done in competitive markets. And so that's critical. We need to be expanding where we have access to competitive purchasing and making the places where it exists even more accessible. And then a couple other areas, coal-fired power plants, we need to phase them out. And lastly, we need to invest in transmission and distribution infrastructure. This is going to be absolutely critical to the grid of the future. So policy is key, and I think companies getting really specific on policy is essential.
Fantastic, thank you. maybe to switch gears a little bit, you've had a distinguished career across sustainability at Google, working in the White House and the U.S. government. What advice would you give to business and government leaders who are looking to really make an impact around sustainability? And when you think about it, how can we accelerate action at scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think that tech has a major role to play, as do all business sectors and government leaders. And my message to all of us is this is an all hands on deck moment. We truly need to be enabling everyone to be part of the solutions. That's cities, businesses, federal governments, individuals. And I think what's great is people want to pitch in. People want to be involved. People want to be making more sustainable choices in their daily lives and their business decisions. And a great example of that is, at Google, we have access to a lot of data, as folks know. And we've seen, for example, that searches for recycling grew by up to 25% in Hong Kong and South Korea, while we saw about a 70% increase in searches for electric cars and bikes just across the APAC region alone in places like India and Taiwan. So the demand is really there. And I think that's where it comes back to then, how do we make the sustainable choice the easiest choice? So many people come and talk to me and say, I want to live more sustainably, or I want to operate my business more sustainably, but I don't quite know where to start. So that's where we need to be giving people really actionable choices. So I mentioned a few examples of that already with tools like eco-routing or the Nest thermostat. I also would point to, for folks who traveled to this conference, who flew to Singapore, you may have seen that in Google Flights, you can now see the carbon emissions that are associated with a flight. Or if you're booking a hotel, you can see eco certifications from third parties that show you the sustainability features of a hotel. So again, I think it's about making the sustainable choice the easy choice, and that this is truly an all hands on deck moment. We all have to be involved.
Yeah, so true. And I think in terms of getting more people involved, clearly at this point, we're seeing a lot of interest from people to transition their careers, transition their lives to work on this challenge, which is also an opportunity. Given your experience and perspective from where you sit, what advice would you have for people who are thinking about dedicating their careers to accelerating the climate transition?
I love this question. And I have to say, happily, I get to have this conversation with people all the time. And it always makes my day when, some brilliant, talented person comes to me and says, what can I do? How do I get involved? And those are some of my favorite conversations I get to have. And what I always say is the great news is we truly need every skill set on this problem. We need engineers, we need product designers, we need communicators, we need researchers, we need educators. We truly need everyone. And so not only are there, I think, a growing number of roles across sectors that are dedicated to sustainability, but I also always encourage people to think about how do you incorporate sustainability into your existing roles? And this is something I love about Google. I think it's part of our secret sauce, is that we have the ability to deploy so many brilliant people against this problem in lots of different ways. And we have a thing at Google called 20% projects, where basically people can dedicate, roughly one day a week to a passion project. And we're so fortunate that we have lots of people that do this in sustainability. And sometimes, it doesn't result in a lot, but sometimes it leads to huge breakthroughs. And I think one of my favorite examples is a colleague of mine, Carl. He's based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And several years ago, he wanted to put solar on his roof at home. And he was like, I don't really know. Do I have enough sun on my roof? Is this feasible? I bet Google Earth Engine could help me figure this out. And this led to a 20% project, which led to a tool called Project Sunroof, which led to the work I shared earlier in this conversation that is enabling cities to set gigawatt solar targets. So again, I think my message to people is we need everyone. Yes, please get involved, whether that's making sustainability or a full-time role or figuring out how to make every job a sustainability job.
So in conclusion, any final thoughts or words of wisdom for the audience as we go into our next day here for the Ecosperity conference?
Just really thrilled that you all are here having this conversation. It's so important in this all hands on deck moment that everyone is engaging, from businesses to policymakers to individuals. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the work you're doing. And let's get this done. You know, there's a lot of work ahead of us. This is going to be hard, but I am hopeful. And it's convenings like this that keep me feeling really hopeful.
Thank you so much, Kate, for taking the time.
Thank you. Great to be here.